Yo, let's go and welcome to the video. This one's a long one, but it's got tons of info, everything that you need to know about Balance Druid for Tier 11 or Phase 1 of Cata Classic. I sat down with the homie Apathy, current rank 1 All-Star Balance Druid, multiple rank 1s on all the boss fights. I've got timestamps to let you skip around if you want to learn a little bit about Apathy at the start of the video. We've got a little segment of that. We've got some gearing discussion, talents, glyphs, rotation, a lot of information in that part. And we break down all three raids boss by boss. What counts towards your parse, what kind of rotational changes you might want to think about on each fight. And this is all based around 25 player raids. So sit back, relax, skip around where you want to find out the most information from, and shout out to Apathy for joining me in this conversation. I've got your logs here on the screen. You're the highest ranked balanced druid so far in Cata Classic, all star wise. Multiple rank ones still current on multiple boss fights. Even more that you've gotten that some people have gotten a little bit higher. Lots of twos that I'm seeing there. But Apathy, thanks for joining me and going over all the tier 11 boss fights, gearing, specs, you name it, we're going to cover it.
Yep.
So how long have you been playing Classic for? I saw you had some logs for Wrath of the Lich King, the last phase, I think it was. But have you been playing Classic the whole time, or did you start up just at the end of Wrath?
Yeah, I've been playing Classic the whole time. Being a retail player, I generally tend to focus on retail rating. I played Demon Hunter on retail, but I've been playing Classic since it started, even in vanilla. I played Feral Tank in the guild I was playing, all the way through to Wrath, where I switched to Blood DK for my guild. Um, I had always played Balance Druid on multiple private servers for years. Wrath, Cata, Mop, all three. So I have extensive Boomkin experience. But I mostly was tanking for my guild just because we needed somebody to tank, and I was leading my guild at the time. The logs I have for balance in Wrath, at least for ICC, was during farm when I joined WeGo because many of my friends were here, and my other guild had stopped playing. So they were just farm logs of me just playing with my friends.
Well, since you've played Boomie for three different expansions, which one's your favorite, Wrath, Mop, or Cata?
I'd say my favorite expansion for Boomkin, where it's going to be at its peak, is Mists of Pandaria for sure. The Eclipse system is perfect. Uh, the shotgunning of Star Surge procs is amazing. It's funny that you go from not wanting crit in Cata to in Mop. It's weighted so highly that you actually gem it over intellect.
Wow. Yeah, I haven't been gearing at all for crit right now, and it feels kind of weird because crit was pretty sought after in Wrath even for a while until we could get that soft cap. But I miss going for crit. I love seeing big numbers. But what type of guild is WeGo? Is it like parse based? Do you do split runs? Is it speed running stuff? I think you guys might have participated in the race to world first for tier 11. Is that right?
Yeah, we did. We started on release. Had a little bit of a rough start, but we pushed through and got everything down. Uh, WeGo, I wouldn't say is a parse or speedrunning guild. Um, I'd say we're a good group of friends that just cares about playing the best that we can without needing to do all the many hours of PTR that a lot of the other guilds at this level do. Um, but yeah, I'd say our guild's focused on aiming for the highest possible rank for the time we play. We generally do 2 runs a week. Um, Currently, right now, it's a main and an alt run, but shortly it will be splits.
Is it just 25 player raids or is it 10 and 25?
WeGo is currently just 25 man. There are people who have 10-man guilds on alt characters, or smaller groups that do 10 men together on alt characters, but as a guild, it's 25 men only.
And you guys are Horde, I think. Is that right?
That is correct, yeah.
Do you prefer Horde yourself, or are you only playing Horde because of your friends like made that decision?
Um, I generally prefer playing whatever faction gives us the best racials, which generally is Horde throughout the majority of the game's history. Um, Me personally, when I started playing the game years ago, when I was way younger, I played Alliance for the longest time until I switched over to Horde to join a top 20 uh, guild on retail, that is. Um, so being Horde it's not been very long, but always playing the weaker faction, it was nice to join the winning team, so to speak, in terms of racials.
Yeah, I started off Classic as Alliance because I used to prefer Alliance back in the OG days when I was PvPing a lot. I liked the gnome racial, the human racial, and then started up in Classic, and I was like, I'm feeling like Horde racials are better for PvE, so I switched over, and I think about TBC Classic. I switched from Alliance to Horde, and haven't looked back. I love the Horde racials, and then we finally get Berserk buff for Druid and Cata, and it's been amazing to have an actual cooldown to use other than War Stomp.
Yeah.
All right. Recently, Boomie was buffed in Cata. A little bit of change to the Eclipse system. There's no longer mastery snapshotting and eclipses anymore, and they replaced that damage loss with a little buff to Insect Swarm. How do you feel about Insect Swarm changing to do Spellstorm damage now?
I think it's a very, very good change for Boomkin as just a spec, mainly because, as you know, the Sunken idea was brought up mainly because of two things. It's that both of your dots do nature damage, and also your mushrooms do nature damage. Especially early on with low stats, mushrooms are very high base damage, making them almost worth it to always use them, even on single target, in solar, that is. And the change basically allows us to seamlessly have strong dots no matter which eclipse that we're in, because we're gaining the double benefit from two lunar dots, and we're gaining the benefit from two solar dots.
Did you do any snapshotting before this change? Like, were you trying to sit in solar on any boss fights? And then has that changed since then, if you were?
Um, so I'm gonna say no. I only found out about the snapshotting 2 days before the race, so I wasn't ready to use it or prepared to use it. I saw all the documentation and stuff about it, and even with some of my gullies, I theory crafted and made a bunch of jokes about it too, because the idea of it made sense mathematically. Because even before or even without using that, on a fight like Halfus as an example, while there are multiple Drakes up and Whelps stacked up, you don't ever want to leave Solar. That's just fundamentally how it is. You want to be keeping your dots up, using mushrooms on cooldown. You can even Hurricane when there's Whelps out just until they die, which is, half a Hurricane channel maybe, and everyone just blows them up. But you pretty much just wanted to stay in solar because you have stronger dots and you gain the mushroom damage on multiple targets. So even without mastery cheesing, Halfus was an example of a fight where you'd get into solar and then you just stay in solar until you were down to pretty much two targets, and then I'd start doing my rotation instead of just hanging around dotting up mushrooming. Because going for a full mastery set for Sunken at least was pretty funny to talk to everyone about, because it was like, oh well, for my Abyss, I'm gonna need that strength ring off Sinestra. I'm gonna need that strength neck off Sinestra. I'm gonna need the cloth helmet off Sinestra. Making jokes like that, and then my actual gear would have to just have no mastery on it. So it was quite funny to talk about.
Yeah, I didn't look too far because I didn't want to tempt myself at the 372 loot. I looked at the pre-raids, so to speak, Sunken gear, and I started working on that the day before it got changed. So I got like 4 or 5 pieces deep. It was feeling kind of cool to be working towards that, and then it got changed, and I was like, oh well, I don't know. Was it good? Was it bad? Yeah. I'm kind of glad on one hand, but it seemed really neat on the other. But speaking of gearing, I've got a couple questions about gear for you. Everybody's usually has like a little bit of preference. There's guides on like Wowhead and stuff like that, but I typically go a little bit off of like what's suggested on websites and kind of do my own thing here and there. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on like the 2 set tier bonus, the 4 set tier bonus, and like what would you suggest as the best off piece for the tiers? Would that be like the chest off piece, the legs? What do you think?
I would say our two piece is a good tier set bonus. It's not insane, but not many of the two piece bonuses are insane. Our two piece is just strong. It gives us 5% crit to our strongest abilities, just flat. Um, and that bonus, of course, is going to be amplified the more targets you're dotting in a fight, which a lot of the fights you are dotting more than one target. So a nice strong bonus. Our 4 piece is rather weak, in my opinion, compared to most classes. The issue with it is that it's a 15% crit buff that drops by 5% for each crit that you get. But the main issue with it is that one, it can be consumed by a moonfire, which you have to pretty much use at the beginning of an eclipse. And two is that the buff only lasts for, I don't know what it is, 8 or 10 seconds. So if you're dotting up or using mushrooms or moving around or even just casting, like imagine hitting the lunar, your starfires are over 2 second casts each. And then on top of using your dots, sometimes the buff will just run out. If you don't hit guaranteed crits on every cast, you're going to lose the buff because it just lasts such a short duration of the time because it doesn't drop unless you actually get a crit. I just think overall, compared to most classes, the 4 piece is just very bad. As for off piece, when going for tier, it's kind of a double bonus when you think about it because of the 3 major off pieces. Generally, when going for an off piece, most of the time you want to use helm, chest, or legs because they have the highest stat value. So you want to be going for an item with good stats on high stat value pieces. The double bonus is that our chest has our worst stats, which is mastery crit. Preferably, we'd want something along the lines of spirit haste, haste mastery, spirit mastery, even. But the chest is mastery crit, which is not ideal for us. And the chest off of magma, which is spirit mastery, is a good ideal stat combo. Not to mention that our off-piece choices for helm and legs are both spirit crit, which are also not great options. So
So you're feeling like Scorched Wormling Vest is the best off piece? That's
yeah,
the one for Magma, yeah? Okay, cool. And trinkets is one that I haven't done my due diligence on, but I have Bell and Volcano myself. I got Bell this lockout here, and I simmed it a little bit, and Bell seemed to be doing pretty good damage. So there's other trinkets, the Mirror and Heart, and it looks like you've got the Heart trinket. So are you gonna stick with Heart and Volcano, or are you trying to look for Mirror and Bell as well? Like, what are your thoughts overall on trinkets?
for trinkets, I have a lot to talk about, and I'll preface it with saying that I don't think the sims for Boomkin are very accurate.
Mm.
And each trinket is very situational, I'll call it. Um, Starting off with Mirror, it's an extremely complicated trinket for Boomkin in comparison to most other trinkets. And the reason for that is that it's a mastery proc. So when you think about mastery procs, what you need to understand is that one, snapshotting works. This isn't retail. It doesn't change your eclipse as you're in it. Snapshotting works, meaning you have to hit an eclipse with the proc active to gain any of the benefit. So if it procs and you're in an eclipse, you're getting nothing until you hit your next eclipse. It's completely wasted. So it can potentially have zero value. It can potentially just be worthless. At the same time, the trinket can be good on fights where you want to stay in an eclipse, such as, I'll bring it up again, as Halphus, right? If you want to stay in solar for the beginning, your trinket is going to proc on pull. It's going to proc right before you get into solar, and you'll have that benefit the entirety of solar. Even when the trinket's off, because you hit solar in that trinket proc, you will have that mastery benefit. But again, the issue with it is that you need to be very meticulous with how you use it. You need to track it. You need to make sure that it procs before you get into an eclipse, because if you don't hit one in the window that it's up, the trinket did nothing for you the entire time. Volcano is just a strong, solid trinket. Nothing bad to say about it. If you were somebody who isn't able to get another trinket other than, heart, keeping Volcano is totally fine. Strong at all points. Raw intellect proc's great for our dots. Nothing really bad to say about it. The bell has potential to be better than Volcano. I haven't really simmed it, and I don't own one, but I'm going to try and probably get one to play it along with Heart, because it's a solid trinket. Having crit is not amazing, but reforging exists. You can mitigate that downside a little bit. And the proc is great for our dots. Very nice, strong spell power proc. In my opinion, Heart is the best trinket of the four. People find it annoying to play around, but I think much like how Mirror is annoying to use for Boomkin and it's very difficult to use, Heart is the opposite. It's great to use for Moonkin for one reason, and it's that most classes have a cooldown that they press, and they want to obviously combo. They want to get their trinket procs, they want to use their gloves, they want to use their racial all at the same time to line up a massive burst. Boomkin doesn't have a cooldown, which means it doesn't really matter if I have to wait a little bit to use my trinket, because our cooldowns are our eclipse. That's what the cooldown is. It's not Treants, it's not Starfall, it's being in your eclipse, it's procking your dot, procking everything and applying your dots. So the benefit to Heart is that generally on an opener, because you can get to solar relatively quickly, you're going to precast your Star Surge. I'm able to hit my Berserking pretty much one or two casts in, and I will still be able to use my gloves and Zerking right as I get into solar, because the only reason I need those buffs is to apply my dots. Those need to be up for my dots. It doesn't really matter if it's up the rest of the eclipse. It's just the dots need to get up with those buffs. And because gloves are a 1 minute cooldown, the lockup period for trinkets is only 10 seconds. You're able to pop your heart in your solar, so you're still going to have that benefit during your first eclipse.
If you had to pick two trinkets that you weren't going to be swapping around for anything, just two for the like a more casual player to pick up and hold on for the whole phase, what two would you pick? I know this could vary, but
This can vary, but if you're someone who's not really great at tracking your buffs, or you just don't really want to change based on fight, I'd say Heart and Bell are your best options.
Interesting. Yeah, because from all I've heard, every site, every place I go to, everyone's saying Volcano, and I personally didn't really care for Volcano, so yeah, I might try to pick up Mirror or Heart myself to go along with my Bell. All right. This one I think is kind of easy. Hopefully, weapons. Back in Wrath, it was pretty much your main hand, offhand was the better combo, and it seems that stayed for Cata. I know offhands we can enchant now with 40 intellect, but have you seen any staffs that have caught your eye that you might be going after, or are you on the same boat? Main hand, offhand is just too good.
Well, this one is even easier than it's made out to be, because not only would I say that main hand offhand is still better, but there also are no staff options in this tier from Raid.
True. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, the highest staff was what, the 359 like pre-raid staffs, pretty much.
Yep, it's the BOE off of
Oh, the
Bastion of
trash.
Twilight Trash, or it's the Archaeology staves.
Yeah. All right. There was something else I thought with. Oh, there's a couple main hand options too. Did you have a preference? Because they're all pretty well statted, like the same. But like mace versus dagger, is there any weapon that you preferred other than the other ones?
So currently I'm using the Hammer of Twilight off Cho'Gall. Um, I'm mainly using it because, from a gearing standpoint in a guild environment, maces can only be used by your hybrids, and we'd probably want to prioritize giving daggers to our mages and warlocks, people who can only use the daggers. So we gave our Ellies the Nefarian mace. We gave me the Cho'Gall mace, um, which is haste crit. I would prefer Incineratus, the haste mastery dagger off of Magma. That is our bis, but I currently don't have it yet.
I got Incineratus, and I think there was like three other people. I'm in a 10-man guild, and I think three other people rolled on it, and I felt kind of bad. But uh, it was like my first raid night with them, and I was nervous, and I was like, "Do I roll on this? Do I not?" But nobody said anything. My guild's been pretty chill on loot. Like I passed on a tier piece, and they're like, "No, you got to roll on that. Like, what are you doing?" So I'm glad loot in my guild's not like an issue. At least not yet. Hopefully it stays that way. But speaking of stats, there on the difference of the weapons, we already talked a bit about stat like priority. So are you thinking it's haste, mastery, crit? Are you worrying about the haste breakpoints at all? Or are you just kind of like full sending on haste?
Breakpoints are important to look at for pretty much anybody. Most classes have a breakpoint to watch. For Boomkin, we have many. Same thing with any dot class, you have many. If you look at the breakpoints, there are many spreadsheets that show all the breakpoints and under what conditions um, changes how much haste you need. As an example, luckily we don't have this problem, but classes that can be a goblin, they're going to have numbers. They're going to have a plethora of numbers just spread out, right? It's like, are you a goblin? Do you have DI? All these conditionals that are going to tweak all of your breakpoints, that make it very frustrating to actually look at and understand. Um, for Boomkin, the only things that are showed, the only conditionals that are shown are three things. There's, is Nature's Grace up? Is DI up? And then is a combination of the two up? So because we're mostly dotting in our Nature's Grace window, as in 90% of the time your dots should be in your Nature's Grace window, the only thing to look at is Nature's Grace plus DI or Nature's Grace alone. Personally, I have a DI in my raid all the time. First week, I did not. And because I didn't in first week, I had a different haste breakpoint than I go for now, which required me to get more haste. But now I do have access to a DI. So with Nature's Grace and DI up, the haste breakpoint that I go for is 1500. At that point, your dots are gaining your additional tick. The next breakpoint after that is just realistically, it's not obtainable. It's too high. It's not worth going for because you're just sacrificing everything else. Which the next haste breakpoint would be 2637,
Hmm.
which is quite a leap. It's 1100 haste higher. So
Yeah.
um, to sacrifice everything to go for that, you got to remember that your mastery is still valuable, and you'd be dropping all of it to go for that haste, which is just not worth it. You want to go for that when it's convenient to do so, which is probably going to be near Bis Firelands or even early Dragon Soul.
So how did you convince your guild to give you DI? Because there's a lot of sites, guild discords and stuff. Everybody always has to try to fight for buffs like this, with like focus magic and wrath, and maybe even focus magic still now. Like power infusions, another cooldown that often gets fought for. So how did you end up getting DI? Did you show them some info and say, hey, this is this much DPS, and maybe it's not as much DPS for other specs? Like, what was going on?
Using the WoW Sims site, it showed that of the three people that were considered for it, which were myself, the Shadow Priest, and the Mage, I gained the least from it. But the general issue I have is that not only do I believe that the Boomkin sims there are not accurate, but it's also the fact that all of these sims are done in a patchwork environment. The general issue with that is that most fights you're not able to just stand there and cast the entire time. Either something is going to disrupt you, something is going to make you move, anything like that. disrupts it heavily. The thing to understand about Boomkin is that DI, what that's for, is directly for our dots. It doesn't really matter about our casts. With Mage as an example, Mage likes DI for the periodic damage that it gives to their Ignite and Combust, but also because of their haste break points for Fireball. Right? They are spamming Fireball. If they have to move, DI loses a lot of value for them. Same thing with Shadow Priest multi-dots. Shadow Priest multi-dots take Shadow Priest undoubtedly gains more benefit than Boomkin does from DI, but it's more of a thing of just what your breakpoints are, what's easy to get. Mage has the lowest haste breakpoints of the three, so it's relatively easy for them to hit that. I pretty much just told them simply as just, you know, on fights where you have to move, on fights where I'm able to multi-dot, I'm just going to gain more benefit than the mage will. And lately we haven't had our Shadow Priest in. I think he went into the second round. I don't remember, but it's pretty much how many warlocks you have, how many people are options for it, and yeah, I just ended up with the
Sweet. I've had it a couple times in heroics and stuff. I don't know if I've had it in raid yet, but yeah, it seems pretty beneficial to have. I did a little stem on it, I think, and or maybe I saw it on the Druid Discord. It was like 1400 DPS on a single target fight, and I was like, that's pretty decent. But we've got talents here. I looked on one of your logs and looked like you had a point in the Feral Tree, which I assume is Führer, and I want to say it was 13 points in Resto. So I'm curious what your talent build looks like. You want to go through the whole thing, or?
um I can go through it in a simple, understandable manner, I
Yeah,
suppose.
cool.
Um, Starting off outside of the boom country, I'll lay out basically the thought process on it as it is. Um, the one point that I put in Fury, it's not going to give you any sort of damage increase. It's not absolutely necessary if you're just casually playing the game. What that is for is when you shapeshift into cat form, it gives you 30 energy to start off, which means that you don't have to wait before hitting Stampeding Roar. So what Fury does is it allows you to shift and roar immediately rather than having to just sit around in cat form doing nothing. It's a button that isn't entirely for Stampeding Roar. It doesn't give you really any other benefit. It gives you 5% max mana, but that's not really a concern for us as Moonkin. So that's that point. As for Resto, there's the mandatory points, which are Heart of the Wild, Natural Shapeshifter, and Master Shapeshifter. Because Heart of the Wild is giving you 6% int, just raw damage. And Master Shapeshifter is giving you 4% spell damage, which again, raw damage. Perseverance is just an extra place to put points because we don't need any other points, and it's 6% basically flat DR. 90% of the damage you're going to be taking is magic, and you are doing more damage alive than you are dead, I promise. It's just really not worth going for anything else. A side comment that I made was that Blessing of the Grove in the top left of Resto, it's one of those points where it's like, if you want to be greedy, you can put points in. Like you can take points out of Perseverance or Fear and put it in here. It's going to give you 6% direct damage of Moonfire. It's the most minor of minor damage increases. It's going to barely affect your damage at all, and you're trading out utility and survivability. I don't think it's worth it at all, but it's just an option that's there. As for the balance tree, you're pretty much taking everything early on other than Moonglow. You don't need the mana cost reduction at all. Arguably, if you made the argument that you're in a guild where you're never able to innovate yourself, which doesn't really exist as much anymore because innovate just isn't that strong, you could put 2 points into Moonglow instead of the 2 in Dream State, but we'll get to that eventually. But you're taking your Nature's Grace, very important. Starlight Wrath, Nature's Majesty, Balance of Power, Genesis, all of this super important stuff. Euphoria, very strong to get into your eclipses and also restore your mana when you hit one. Moonkin form, of course. Typhoon, good utility spell. Knocking back stuff is generally helpful. There's no reason not to take this. And I also would highly recommend you don't glyph it because the knockback is just valuable.
Oh yeah.
You're not always going to be hitting Typhoon on a fight. It's just a utility spell to have. Shooting stars, your procs always need that. I personally recommend putting 3 out of 3 in Alkin Frenzy. I know there are some builds or guides that have you put 1 point or 2 points. What you need to understand about Alkin Frenzy is attacks done to you is any damage done to you. So this counts as AoE, and it worked the same in Wrath. In Wrath, I noticed a lot of people not putting points into this. I always put 1 point into it, even though you had to stretch a little bit to fit points in. I always put a point into Alkin Frenzy because stuff like that just AoEs you constantly. Think of Lich King, think of Festergut, think of Saffron even. That damage can proc a just flat 10% damage increase. It's strong damage increase that just procs for free. Great to have. The rest is just filling out points to get to the bottom of your tree. Earth and Moon, of course, Sunfire, very important. I take Gale Winds. I don't hit Hurricane or Typhoon often, so it's not a massive point, but whatever. Solar Beam, a nice kick. I take Dream State instead of Moonglow and Force of Nature. Here's another point that is generally wondered about: fungal growth. Fungal growth is a solid talent to have if you actually want to slow things for your tank. There's a lot of fights where this is useful, like Maloriak, Magma, Cho'Gall even. There's a lot of fights where fungal growth can be useful, but then there are also fights where dropping mushrooms, because it's part of your rotation, and slowing stuff can actually be a hindrance to your tanks, getting stuff in a position. Even like fights like Halphus, Nefarian, fights like this where fungal growth can actually be bad. I just don't take it at all for that reason. We have hunters to drop traps. It's not really my job to do so. If you're in a 10-man, don't have a hunter, or just generally need slows, putting 2 points in that is a solid investment choice. You can take points out of Gale Winds, as you don't really Hurricane or Typhoon often anyways. And Lunar Shower is just a damage decrease on 90% of things. Any fight where you're multi-dotting, you will be casting 2 Moonfires in a 3-second window, and having it to reduce your Eclipse bar is just not useful at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought Lunar Shower was good on the beta, and then I referenced the Druid Discord, and everybody's like, "No, no, no, it's not good." So I've gone without it myself. I had to make sure with the rank 1 all-star Boomie to verify that it's not good, but I was a huge fan of Wrath, Alkin Frenzy and Wrath, should I say. And I'm the same in Cata. Like I always had points in Wrath. I would try to show people data, like what procs it on each boss, and everybody's like, it's not worth. It's not worth." I'm like, dude, it's 10% damage. Like, of course it's worth. So I've been seeing it proc a lot already in raids. So yeah, I'm a 3 out of 3 Alkin Frenzier. What prime glyphs are you thinking about? Is it just the standard Insect Swarm, Moonfire, Wrath? Are there situational fights maybe where one of those might change around?
I personally use those 3 on every fight. There are fights where you can argue for Glyph of Star Surge
Mm,
just to get your Starfall CD down. But just generally speaking, Starfall isn't a crazy damage button like it was in Wrath. In Wrath, Starfall was like everything. You pop Starfall, oh my god, so much damage. It's not as much the case as it used to be in Cata, and even on fights where that can be good, it's one of those things where you're trading out Wrath, and it's one of those questions where it's how much does Starfall matter, like having it up more. It can be a small damage increase on some fights, but I just don't bother switching generally.
I don't think there's any special major glyphs. I mean, other than Starfall. Have you used Glyph of Focus at all on any fights though?
Glyph of Focus can be used on fights where you're just always going to be in range, but generally I don't. It limits me, and it makes it so that I have to position for it, which is just generally annoying. There's
Yeah.
some fights where you're just always within 20 yards. This is like bosses with massive hitboxes. An example of this is like VNT, where like even if you're out with engulfing, you should be within 20 yards just because of how massive the boss's hitbox is. Same thing with fights like Halphus. Like you can stay within 20 yards, no problem, like you can use it. It's just one of those things where it's not as crazy of a damage increase as it was in Wrath anymore.
All right. Next up, we've got professions. I believe that you have the same professions that I do. Engineering, tailoring. I love the proc. I love because it gives bigger numbers than just having something like jewel crafting or enchanting. But um, you think engineering is like mandatory to have, and then tailoring might be flexible with either jewel crafting or enchanting, or are you thinking that NG tailoring is just the best two to have if you're going for like max damage?
If you're going for max damage and playing Boomkin well, I'd say NG tailoring is kind of required because of the snapshotting of your dots. But like you just said, I think engineering is required mainly because of how strong Synapse is, but also because of how strong Rocket Boots are. Rocket Boots, which was used in Wrath of the Lich King, is now put on your belt instead of your boots, and gives you that massive speed buff without you needing to shift into cat form. It's amazing for repositioning on fights. It would basically recover an attempt to do damage on a fight. Like say you're on Ascending Council as an example, and you're like, you know what, I really want to parse this week, and you just get targeted by a frost orb or whatever. That alone would kill your chances to parse, but Rocket Boots can just save it because you can instantly dash over to the Flame Strike and keep your dots up, keep your mushrooms down. You don't really lose much for it as you would if you actually had to shift into cat form.
Hmm. All right, this one I think people might be referencing the most here. So let's dive into the rotation. We've got some stuff we can do before the boss fight even starts. Uh, Certain eclipses that we probably want to preference over the other one, like solar probably instead of lunar. Maybe there's a case for lunar first on a fight or two. But like, what are you doing before the boss fight even starts while the timer is counting down? And as soon as the boss engages, what's the first couple of spells? Because I know you kind of get into a little bit of a what's it called, like a groove after you get into your eclipse, probably. But those first couple spells are pretty crucial, I think.
Yeah. Um, so before the pull, it's important that depending on the fight that you are doing, you're placing your mushrooms where the tank is going to bring the boss. Because mushrooms, you do not want to be exploding instantly. You want to be waiting until you get into solar to actually blow those up. Um, so, an example like on VNT in Bastion of Twilight, you're going to be putting them in the middle of the room, not where the boss is standing, because the tanks are going to drag it to the middle. But the important thing before the pull is dropping your mushrooms down, and then at around 2 seconds, you can pre-pot and start casting a Star Surge. Star Surge will go off, start flying with the boss, and then immediately you're going to be using your dots and your treants and your Starfall. The dots are going to basically proc your trinkets if the Star Surge didn't hit in time, which is fine. They're not going to have that benefit, but the goal is to get into solar quick enough that all of your procs are still up, along with your gloves and your berserking, to reapply those dots right at the start of solar and have all that damage benefit up at the same time. So generally, my opener consists of precasting Star Surge, both dots up, Treants, Starfall. Then I hit my gloves and my berserking, and then I start spamming Starfires. Of course, using a Star Surge proc if I get one, um, and then getting into solar and immediately putting up your dots with your damage proc still up. At around this point, a couple casts after that, so a couple seconds after that, your Heart of Ignatius is back up, or is able to be used, should I say, and you have 5 stacks of your spell power. So you're able to consume that for massive haste, and you will blow up your mushrooms, preferably with your stuff still up. So you're going to be dotting and mushrooming at the same time. If Mushroom Explosion is off the global, you can just hit it, um, and then start working your way. Depending on the fight, I'll purposefully stay in solar a bit longer. This is multi-dot fights. Um, Fights like Halphus, like I said, I'll stay in solar for quite a bit of time. Fights like Ascendant Council, even, I'm pretty much going to stay in solar until I get a second set of dots out, and then I'm going to start moving because I want 2 empowered dots as long as possible. A common question that we spoke about earlier was, um, if your dots run out of Eclipse, what do you do? A lot of the time, there are ways to prevent that from happening. This can be reapplying your dots at the end of your Nature's Grace window, or this can be filling in stuff to extend the amount of time you're in an eclipse so you can reapply fresh dots and then start
Mm.
moving to the next eclipse. But generally, if you're in a situation where your dots just fall off out of an eclipse, this happens on a Senate Council just because there's a lot of movement to do. Um, just go ahead and reapply both and then start moving to the eclipse. Having dots up is like the most important part of your rotation. It's giving you procs. Your dots are easily your highest form of damage on your spec. Um, Casts matter very little in comparison to those.
All right, let me go through the opener here really quick, make sure I got everything right. We got place your 3 mushrooms before the pull, 2 seconds before combat. You pre-pot your potion and start casting Star Surge. Insect Swarm, Moonfire, Treants, Starfall, pop Gloves and Berserk if you're a troll, uh, Starfire and Star Surge procs to get into Solar, and then reapply Insect Swarm and Moonfire. Cast a Wrath or two, and then pop your Heart buff if you have the Heart Trinket, and then make sure you're detonating your mushrooms while you're in Solar.
The one thing I'll edit there is I would make sure that you blow up your mushrooms right when you enter solar at the same time your dots are going out, because your mushroom explosion is off the global. You can do both at the same time, and you want to give your mushrooms that benefit from your procs. Another thing to mention is that I pop my gloves and my zerking that early because I know that with the haste buff, I'm able to get to solar with those buffs still active. If you are not a troll, I would strongly recommend you wait a little bit longer, because you want to make sure that you have that damage going into solar. You want to make sure that your stuff is up, um, so that you don't miss dotting with your buffs.
Sweet. All right. Let me see if I had anything else here on the rotation that you didn't hit on. I think you covered it all. Star Surge procs. If you're in, whenever you're, wherever you're at in your rotation, you just send your Star Surge right away. Do you ever hold it at all?
Like I said, there are times when I want to stay in an eclipse, and this is a fight again. I'll preface such as Halphus, where I want to stay in solar. Um, there are fights like it, but Halphus is an easy one to reference just because of the nature of the fight. Um, I want to stay in solar at the beginning because you're basically dotting 4 targets and there's whelps out at the start. So at the start, I'm going to have dots pretty much just on Halphus. I'm going to be blowing up the whelps. Whelps are going to die pretty much instantly because everyone's AoEing them. And then after that point, I'm dotting all 4 and using mushrooms on cooldown. I'm not leaving solar for quite a bit of time. I'm not just rushing out. And because of that, I will send some Star Search procs, but I won't be sending them constantly as they come, because using too many will get me out of solar at an inconvenient time.
All right. You ready to tackle the bosses?
Sure.
Cool.
I think that for a lot of the bosses, there's not much of a secret to it as long as
Okay.
you're playing the spec. It's just that Boomkin is very, like I say to a lot of people, I may sound like I'm overcomplicating it, but what you choose to do does change a lot based on what's happening in the fight.
All right. I was just gonna go through. We can make this pretty quick then, if a lot of the bosses are about the same, and then just kind of point out differences on certain fights as we get to them. One of the main things here that I wanted to just cover as we go through the bosses was, what counts towards your parse fight by fight. So let me pull up Conclave here. We'll start with that one, and I'm using your logs from this lockout on the 12th. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. So for this one, the damage done to ravenous creepers is excluded. I couldn't even tell you what ravenous creepers are because I've only done this fight once on heroic, and it was kind of stressful going back and forth across the platforms. But how do you tackle this fight? Like, what's your strategy? Are you assigned to a certain platform and then you have to go back and forth, or what's up with Conclave?
Yeah, so Ravenous Creepers are the ads that spawn on Anshul platform, which is generally where the rangers are sent. It is where I am sent. Um, The Ravenous Creepers spawn and they will basically kill your tank if you don't kill them quickly. The damage to them is excluded because a lot of people just, pad on them and AoE them. They can be healed back up on that platform if they're put through circles. So, of course, if they weren't excluded, you could just keep them there healing and just continuously hit them with AoE. Of course, they need to die. Someone needs to kill them. Um, so if you want to parse, you can try your best to just do your rotation and ignore them, but they need to die for the fight to die. So it's important to try and do your part and help out. A lot of the time, what I'll do as a kind of like sneaky way to do it um, is by helping both me and the raid, and that's being in solar when the ads are out. I can just mushroom on top of the boss and them and get good damage value on both targets so that I'm not doing, I'm not contributing zero and I'm also keeping up my boss damage. Um, but yeah, they're excluded, but they need to die. So if you need to put more damage into them, put more damage into them. That's just how it is.
Alright, I see you're starting off on Soul. Did you ever go across to the other bosses? I'm sorry.
Yeah. As the fight goes on, you cross and then cross back to finish. Depending on your group's damage, can make this a fight where you're able to or unable to parse on. Because basically, some groups do damage quick enough where you pretty much only need to jump over one time,
Mm.
whereas most groups have to do two jumps, and that jumping time is just complete downtime where no damage is going out other than your dots. The one tip that I'd give on Conclave is that make sure that you are redotting your boss before you leave your platform, because those dots are still active, those dots are still doing damage, and then when you get to your new platform, you can dot that boss as well and get that value. Um, but that's pretty much it. It's a fight that really, really depends on your overall group damage, whether you're going to parse or not.
All right, cool. Next up is Alec here. This fight was pretty hectic for me this week because it was my first time again on Heroic, and there's a lot going on that first 20% of the boss fight. So I'm curious if you have any insight on how to keep doing some damage with a lot of random movement that might happen.
Alec here is another one where, other than doing your rotation, not much to really say. Because that fight is very hectic, like you just mentioned. A lot of healing in phase one can be scary if you get bad RNG, and most wipes on Alakir just happen due to complete RNG, and then you get that pull where you get through, and once you get past phase one, generally things go smoothly for most groups. Um, the only thing to mention basically is that in phase two, the tank will be tanking adds to the side that need to be killed at specific times to maintain a damage taken increase on the boss. Generally, they will ask people to dot the ad that is dying next so that it gets into a health range where they can just execute it quickly at the right time. So, quite simply, dot up the ad that's dying next for your tank, for your group, and keep dots on the boss and continue doing your damage rotation. When the ad needs to die, you can even blow up some mushrooms on them just to execute them quickly as your own little form of execute. Um, and pretty much just hitting the boss. As the fight progresses, the boss is taking more and more damage. So it's very vital you're putting as much into the boss as possible. But that's pretty much the entire fight. Other than that, it's just some movement, but you got to do what you got to do.
Should have asked on the first fight, Conclave. When are you guys popping Lust on that fight? And then same thing for Alakir. Are you waiting until you have stacks for Alakir to pop it? I think we waited until we had like 4 of the debuffs.
Yeah, that as well. Yeah, we lost once we have a good amount of debuffs, and same thing with Conclave. Conclave we lost on the first jump. So basically, what happens is the bosses are gaining energy towards their special. The Nazir special does massive amounts of AOE damage to people on the platform, but because the people on Anshul and the people on Rohash, the melee are going to jump over, which are on Rohash, to the Nazir platform, and so are the range from Anshul to get out. And we're basically going to all be together on that first jump, and we're all going to hit Lust and pop everything and nuke them down. At that point, because our group damage is so high, Anshul and row hash should be very low as it is. So generally, what we're able to do is finish off Nazir and send people back just to finish the bosses, and all three of them die. That's how you basically do it with few jumps. It just requires high group damage.
All right, and for Alec here, there's no parsing rules, so that's interesting. I kind of like those fights, even if there is some potential padding that you could do. I like the no rules, just whatever you can do to pump, just pump. No normalized damage either, so yeah, stack those debuffs up. All right, the next fight is Omnitron. Uh, for this one, it's removed from the all-star points for damage and from the complete raid. So yeah, the complete opposite there of Alec here as far as parsing goes. But speaking just of doing top damage, as much damage as you can, what are you doing on Omnitron?
So Omnitron's a fight where every time a new boss comes out, the old one is going to gain a shield where you don't want to hit them. The thing I'd say to be clear about is that there are two shields, or should I say, there's three shields you never want to do any damage to at all. This is the fire shield, the arcane shield, and the electric shield. These three you never want to hit at all. Very, very bad. Um, the thing with the poison shield that's interesting is that dot damage isn't going to poison you. Whereas like on the other ones, they're absorb shields. So doing damage into the fire one is going to absorb, and if it hits 0, it's going to wipe your raid. An electric one is going to throw lightning at you that AoEs very bad. The poison one, if you have dots up before the shield is up, won't have any effect on you. And on all the shields in general, they last a certain duration, and the boss is still up for a little bit after that. So you can actually reapply your dots when the shields are dropped, so that you have dots in as many targets as possible. The other thing to keep in mind is that when they're stacked up, which the tanks generally try and do a little bit when they first come out, you can drop your mushrooms and explode it on 2 targets, solid. And then the other main thing is just helping your group kill the green oozes that spawn from Toxitron, and during Arcanotron being in the damage buff puddle. That's pretty much it. It's just keeping your dots up on as much as you can and doing your rotation.
All right. Ooh, this next fight is one of my favorite ones, I think. Magma. I don't know why. It seems cool. There's a little bit of AoE potential. There's burn phases. Uh let me pull up Magma here, but the damage done to lava parasites is removed in 25 player difficulties, but not in 10. But since I am in 10, I've been looking. I wasn't assigned to help with the ads. It was a mage and maybe somebody else that was back there doing damage, and I was getting kind of jealous. But since it's removed from damage, for you, are you still trying to help out with parasites, or you just able to stick to the boss?
Well, again, this is one that depends on your strat. My guild, as well as many other guilds, the strategy we do is we have one person kiting the parasites. We actually don't kill them at all. So it's not a thing about requiring to do damage to them or not. They don't count overall, and our strat also just doesn't have our DPS hit them at all, anyways. We have one guy just running around kiting them the entire fight. So, in terms of doing good damage on Magma, it's keeping your dots on both Magma and the skeleton, using your mushrooms on the 2 target, just doing your rotation in general. The only important thing I'd say is, have shit ready for when the head comes down. And the important thing to consider is that the head and Magma count as separate entities. So redotting Magma before the head comes down is great. And also, while the head is down, you want to be pumping into the head as much as possible, but make sure to redot before the head goes back up, because those dots stay up.
Mhm. Interesting. Yeah. My UI is pretty basic, so I wasn't able to see that I could be doing damage to both. So that'll be big for me. Hopefully, I can target both of them with my default UI. But let's see here. Oh yeah, it looks like you guys lost. Is it the second head phase, or is that the first? It looks like a pretty quick fight.
It is the first. We just do too much damage. If we were to lust a second head phase, uh, we'd basically not. We'd have to hold damage to get a second head phase. Like,
Hmm.
even if we don't lust, the first one will get the boss too low, and we pretty much have to stop damage to get a second head, so we just don't bother. We just push all the way through with everything on the first.
All right, next up is Atramedes. For this one, there's no rules, just pump, pump, pump. So, how do you handle Atramedes? Looks like a fight that you guys are popping lust at the start of the fight, which is
Yep.
what I like. So, yeah.
Atramedes is a extremely. It's probably the easiest heroic out of anything in any of the instances. There's really not much to say about it. It's doing your rotation. Just drop your mushrooms where the tank is going to bring the boss, which is in the middle of the room usually. The way my guild does it is because our boss time is quick. We actually use 2 gongs on the pull, which gives us that nice vulnerability window during CDs, um, and allows us to just pump during that damage window. But it's pretty much doing your rotation. There's really not much to say. It's you have to hopefully breath doesn't target you, hopefully fire doesn't target you. Even when the boss is up in the air, you're doing damage. Hopefully the boss doesn't target you with uh, the sonic bursts. Hopefully an imp doesn't jump on your head, but it's pretty much just a tank and spank fight for you. There's not really much you need to worry about.
Yeah, for me, I was having to dodge those sonic waves way too much, I felt like. So I was just wondering, yeah, for not asking you, but I was always just wondering during the fight, like, wait a minute, what am I supposed to be doing here? It seemed kind of weird. I think there's a couple different strats for this fight, so we might need to get a little bit more gear, a little bit more settled in before we can kind of pump as much as you guys are. All right, we've got, what was that? Atramedes. We got Chimeron. No rules, but the fight is removed from healing all star points and healing complete raids. So, uh, Chimeron. Let me get this one pulled up here really quick. All right. What you got for Chimeron?
So a key thing on Chimeron that a lot of people don't realize is that although you will have to move to stack up after massacres and during feud, um, something that's very underutilized by people who um, do Chimeron is mushrooms. They're not utilized enough by a lot of people. So generally in Wrath, redotting would be used as filler when you had to move. It wasn't always important to maintain full uptime on both dots. That wasn't a thing in Wrath because your dots just weren't like they are now. Um, but the difference now is that it's completely different in the fact that we're snapshotting our dots, and our dots are very important. We don't just want to be throwing dots out randomly as we're running around. It oftentimes hurts our damage rather than helps it. Um, so the benefit is that when you have to move to stack or when you have to move to leave, drop mushrooms on the boss. It's free damage, and like I've said many times, you want to blow up your mushrooms when you're in solar, but if you have to rip it, then you have to rip it. But if you know you're going to be in solar soon, you can leave those mushrooms there and wait to explode them. The globals that mushrooms take are placing them down, so that's something to do while you're running, rather than just throwing out random globals. Mushrooms putting them down is very important because you'll notice on my Chimeron log, on a fight where usually it's a single target fight, nothing's really going on, I have 8 casts of mushrooms or explode. So that means I place down 24 of them throughout the fight. So it's just something to do while you're running around.
Yeah, it's taken me a little bit of time to get out of the habit of just kind of throwing up dots when I'm moving, even if they're already up. So I've been getting a little bit better with popping mushrooms while I move. But then I always just immediately detonate them. What I need to work on is waiting until I'm in solar to detonate, and I should see a little bit of DPS increase there for myself. All right, we got Maloriak. All damage done to ads in phase 2 is excluded. Phase 2 starts with the cast of release all minions. Are you doing any damage to the ads during the fight, or are you focusing boss?
Generally, I'll be a little silly sometimes on this fight, just because um, we have yet to do a Maloriak pull where this is a very, very difficult fight to tell people how to parse on because strats vary extremely on this fight, more than like I'd say any other fight. and that's basically when are you pushing the boss. Some
Yeah.
groups will just push it whenever. Some groups will wait till first screen. Some groups don't have the damage to push at first screen, so they're going to wait even longer. Some groups just push when they can after first screen, and some just AFK the fight until second green and then push the boss and kill it. The final one where it's just wait till second green, so you just kill all the ads and then push the boss, makes it a guaranteed kill. You have no chance of wiping if you do it that way, because it cleans up all the ads. No kiting is going to be required. Nothing is going to be required, and then you could just pretty much tank and spank the last phase with no issues. But it's one of those fights where if you're parsing, I don't think I've gotten a rank 1 on this fight in all the weeks, just because either I'm not padding on ads enough or we're pushing at a time that's inconvenient. I haven't quite figured out how to. This is the one fight I quite haven't figured out how to, do the craziest amount of damage on. But basically, there are some times where you want to hold damage on the boss so you can dial up the ads or do damage to the ads. But again, varies wildly depending on when you're pushing into last phase.
Yeah, I've been trying to do a little damage on the ads on some of our pools, and then they wouldn't really have a slow at some point when I would try to pop mushrooms down again, and then the tank would just be running all over the room, so I'd have to reposition the mushrooms again, and it was kind of frustrating to try to get as much damage on them as I could. So, I mean, you've got some solid tanks in your raid group. I know subtle, so I'm sure you guys could maybe get it to where you can kind of pad a little bit if if you ever asked them to. I bet you they would let you. But we've got Nefarian up next. Damage done to the animated Bone Warriors is excluded, and Nefarian is also removed from All Star points. So, uh, it's an interesting fight. I did my first heroic kill this week, and the whole damage buff thing while you're getting mind controlled is probably the reason that it's removed from all star
Yep.
points. But yeah, any tips for Nefarian? Are you guys doing the strat where you're not doing any of the crackle buffs before you kill Anixia, or what are you guys doing?
We do one crackle before Anixia,
Mm.
and then we don't do a second. The main things on Nefarian is a very, very annoying fight, and it was thankfully removed from All Stars because, like you said, sometimes there have been some pulls, like even on our first kill. On our first kill, like there are some pulls where if you get good MCs, you're just dumpstering everybody. Like I think on one of our pulls, I think I was like 20 or 25% of the ahead of the DPS in second, just because I was getting MC'd constantly. And being able to snapshot dots in that state is so massive. Even if you're not in Eclipse, you want to be in an Eclipse, but even if you're not, non-Eclipse dots with that buff up beat any Eclipse dots. Like there have been times where, my buff was running out, I was out of Eclipse, I'd redot and then get into an Eclipse, and I'd purposefully not reapply my dots until the end just because I know how strong the buffed dots are. Um, but on that fight, it's basically in phase 1, multi-dot where you can. You don't want to be standing in a Nixia Lightning, but if you get an MC that runs you out, you can dot up Anixia, you can dot up Nefarian, have damage on both. Same thing on the platforms. The thing to keep in mind is that crackle happens every 10%, and a crackle going off at a wrong time wipes your group. So if the boss has a reasonable amount of health to where you can get away with dotting up Nefarian, um, in phase 2, like when you're on the pillars, you can dot up your pillar target and dot up Nefarian. Both targets are active to be hit. So just keep dots up on both and focus your pillar target. Just make sure that the Nefarian doesn't hit 80%, because if a crackle goes off in that phase, it's likely almost guaranteed a wipe. So if the boss is like above 82% or something, just go ahead and send dots, Nefarian in on the ads. The multi-dot value is great. And then other than that, it's pretty much just your normal rotation. Um, it really is a fight that depends on how many times you get MC'd and whether you snapshot your dots properly in that window. It's pretty much all it is. Like the best parses on this fight or the highest damage um, are just who got MC'd the most. I know a good friend of mine, Hardy, who also plays a Moonkin, on the first week, we got our kill, and I think I had a rank 1 for a bit, and then he raided the next day, and he got MC'd on his kill pull so many times to where his end damage was 6k higher than mine. That's almost a fifth higher. That's 20% more damage than I did, which was the previous rank 1. So that can show you how wildly that damage buff can vary your damage.
Yeah, I've only had it I think once, and I crit something for over 100k, and I was like, yeah, this feels really good. I like this. But it's been a bit of a stressful fight, so but yeah, getting that damage buff, man, that's what I play this game for, seeing those big numbers. It's like that heroic, the underwater heroic boss, that the last one from I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But when the burn phase of that heroic boss, where you're getting some big crits over like 1,000,000 damage, I love it.
Oh, Ozomat and Throne of the
Yeah,
Tides.
yeah, Throne of the Tides, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let me get we got the last raid, Bastion of Twilight, starting off with Halphus. Damage done to dragons that don't die is excluded. So what you doing on Halphus?
So most of the time on Halphus, that damage done to dragons don't die, that truly doesn't really matter. Some groups will let out the stone dragon at the end, but not kill it. So in that case, because you know that it's not going to die, if the mob isn't going to die and it's also not going to count on logs, there's just no reason to waste your time on it. Which is really the only Drake that doesn't die on Halphus. On Halphus, every other Drake is going to die. All the damage matters, so that's not really something that needs to be worried too much about. Halphus is a fight where, like I referenced many times, is a classic example of you don't really want to leave solar right away. You're going to be sitting in solar for quite a bit until the drakes die. At least in my group does a lot of damage. The ads will die relatively quickly. It's not like I'm going to be sitting in solar for like 2 minutes or something crazy. But probably for half of the fight, I'll be in solar, just dotting up and using my mushrooms. To do maximum damage, you're probably going to be dotting up Halphus, dropping your Treants, your Starfall, and then doing your normal thing where you're just rushing into Solar to put up your Solar dots on Halphus. And then you're going to be focusing on Whelps at that point, where you're going to be Mushroom Explode, Hurricane, and then Whelps are going to die practically instantly. And then you're playing the game where you're keeping dots on 4 targets. There are some people who release Drakes 2 at a time, but most groups that I've seen at least release everything at once other than stone. So you're pretty much going to be playing the game where you're dotting up nether, you're dotting up time, you're dotting up I'm blanking on what the third one is. A storm. There you go. Storm, and then you're dotting up Halphus. You're dotting up all 4. You're keeping dots on all 4 the entire time using mushrooms on cooldown. You're no longer pressing Hurricane because you're basically working on maintaining your dots while using mushrooms. Because you got to think, keep putting dots up on 4 targets is going to be just on globals 8 seconds, and then you're going to be using mushrooms twice in that window because putting them down is each a global, so that's 6 seconds worth of globals on mushrooms, which pretty much puts you at like 14-15 seconds. Your dots last around 18, so you're pretty much ready to redot right away. You don't really have time to waste on Hurricane or whatever. You can maybe get a filler Star Surge throw in, or filler even Starfire. And I say Starfire specifically because when you're in solar, because we want to stay in solar, if you have to cast something to be a filler, we're casting Starfire because it does not move our bar. We don't want our bar to move at all when we're doing it this way. But again, just hanging around for a bit is fine too, because doing that entire thing, 2 sets of mushrooms, dots on everything, that takes around 14-15 seconds. And your dots are only up for 3 more seconds after that. It's just important to understand what order you dotted the drakes in so that you can seamlessly go through and redot. And then as drakes are dying, Halphus gains a damage taken bonus every time a drake dies, which you want to be focusing the drakes to help your group. But because you're going to be multi-dotting and mushrooming anyways, when you get to the point where, okay, I want to do damage now, I want to throw out Star Surges, I want to start doing my rotation, you're pretty much sending all of that onto Halphus while mushrooming and keeping dots up on the drakes, because Halphus is going to be taking bonus damage as a single target that the others won't. But that's pretty much it when it comes to Halphus. Halphus is dot up time, staying in solar, and then making the decision to, move into lunar and doing your normal rotation from there.
Yeah, looking at your damage breakdown, you've got 22k DPS just from your mushrooms. Then Insect Swarm and Sunfire taking up second and third place on the meter there. Yeah, 92k DPS, dude. That's wild. All right, we've got Thuralian and Valiona. I probably said that wrong. I thought it was Valonia.
Valiona. Yeah,
Valiona, yeah.
VNT is usually what a lot of people call it.
That's the twins fight too, right?
Yep.
It's called twins? Okay, I knew I wasn't going crazy.
VNT is super simple for you. If you're not in one of the groups going down, even if you are in one of the groups going down, it's really no big deal. So on the start of the pull, you're dropping your mushrooms in the middle of the room because that's where the tanks are going to drag the boss. And even though one boss is down and one boss is in the air, both can be dotted. Both need to have full uptime on your dots. A lot of where people lose damage on this fight is they let their dots fall off on one of the bosses. Dots need to be up at all times on this fight. All times. Always need to be up. Have dots constantly up on both. It doesn't matter if you fall out of an eclipse and your dots are falling off, it's time to reapply dots. Just keep your dots up no matter what. Because even me, I have times where I need to reapply out of an eclipse on this fight because in this fight, one of the bosses is in the air and is not in range of mushrooms. So it's not one of those fights where I'm just mashing mushrooms over and over. I'll drop mushrooms while I'm running. Same rule as Chimeron. If I need to dodge a mechanic, if I need to move, if I need to do any of that stuff, mushrooms is what I'm using as filler. So that's where my mushroom damage comes from. But I'm not actively just spamming it like I would on other fights where there's two target. But yeah, dot up time matters everything. And then from there, doing your rotation. The thing to keep in mind on fights where you have to multi dot is that because you're spending double the amount of time putting up your dots, that's time taken away from getting to your next eclipse. And what that means is that your dots are very, very even more likely to fall off before you get to your next eclipse. So often on fights like this, I'll put up two sets of dots and then I'll start doing my damage rotation and then I'll reapply two sets of dots again before I leave my eclipse. That way I have strong dots going all the way until my next eclipse and then I can reapply again. And I'll basically repeat that process. Even if you're overlapping your dots or cutting them a little bit, it's better to have strong dots the entirety of the time rather than placing up dots that are very weak, using globals for weak dots that you're just going to replace anyways later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thing with dots for me is I've always wondered about sitting in one eclipse for too long and then just not getting as much Nature's Grace uptime, since it takes like a minute for it to expire, but resets when you get into a new eclipse. So yeah, it sounds like it's if you're just going straight from solar with two targets, that Nature's Grace isn't gonna matter too much. Like you should be able to get to lunar fast enough to get good value of the cooldown resetting. And what was it? One of the you were talking about mushrooms. Maybe you've mentioned it before. I apologize if you did, but you would still have mushrooms as part of your rotation on cooldown if it was two targets.
Practically, yeah. There are fights where it's very annoying. Like if there's two targets up, mushrooms are just value to use. It is. But generally, the issue is that a lot of the fights where it's just two target, um, stuff will be moving around. Like the next one that we're going to be covering is Ascendant Council, and I'll get more into it on that fight. But generally, on two targets, mushrooms are good. But like I said, on this one specifically, one of the bosses is in the air and mushrooms don't hit both. So you're really only using it while you have to move.
All right. Well, you'll have to excuse my lack of knowledge here at all on council. We did this one on normal this week, and I don't know if we're gonna be able to get to prog it on heroic this upcoming reset or not. So I'm gonna be listening as close as I can to what you have to say about council here.
So on Ascendant Council, it's the similar to VNT in the sense where dot uptime on both targets is king. Something to keep in mind in the first phase is that a buff will or a debuff will be thrown out onto a random player that increases damage done to one of the bosses. While getting one of these buffs is important, and yes, you want it to do more damage, it's important to push both bosses at the same time. So sometimes you might not be able to focus the boss you have the damage buff towards. But in most cases, you're going to be keeping up both your dots. You're going to be using mushrooms, and you're going to be sending your star surges into the vulnerable boss, so to speak, that you have a buff towards. Um, that's mainly phase one. In phase two is kind of where it gets annoying. Same thing with even in phase one. In phase one, a tank needs to move Faludius out of the group for Glaciate, which means the bosses aren't stacked up. Just annoying for mushrooms.
Mhm.
And then the fire guy, forgot his name for some reason, will jump out of the group and then dash back in for fire, which again separates the bosses for a moment. It's annoying for mushrooms. And same thing in phase two. In phase two, everyone's scrambling to get their wind or grounded buffs. Sometimes the tanks will separate. Sometimes the tanks have to run together to a buff. The bosses are constantly in motion, which means it's hard to get good mushroom value. But of course, if you have to be running, mushrooms are of course still useful to use. You just have to do your best to place it where the boss is going to be moving. But pretty much same thing. Dot up time is king on Ascendant Council. A lot of the time, I'll spend like almost all of my globals throwing up dots and using mushrooms. Like you can see by the damage meter, like my casts are like very little of my damage. I think casts are what 25% of my damage on that fight. It's just I'm just running around constantly using mushrooms and dotting because it's just a fight that requires you to move around a lot. It's mainly in last phase where you're able to actually just plant and cast.
All right, and I forgot to say the parse rules for T and V. Damage done with engulfing magic is normalized, and for council there are no rules. Oh, so Cho'Gall. This was a fun fight to prog through. The last phase of this fight was kind of hectic, and the damage done to the spiked tentacle is excluded for this fight. I think I was trying to do a lot of ad damage on this fight, if I remember correctly. So, how were you tackling Cho'Gall? Were you on ad duty at all?
On Cho'Gall, everyone is kind of on ads. It's important for the ads to die quickly, no matter which ones they are. Um, the key things that I would say on Cho'Gall would be mushrooms have a lot of value on this fight. On Heroic, at least, he spawns the fire and shadow elementals constantly, which he'll be dragged onto so that melee can cleave. That's a two target easy mushroom hit that you could always be using. Um, Generally, depending on how it looks like the mob will die, I generally judge this based on where it spawns. The fire and shadow ads don't have a crazy amount of health, which means they have the potential to die instantly. There are times where I will dot them up, but there are also times where I won't. Just based on where it spawns. If the boss is on the ad instantly, it pretty much means that melee are going to obliterate the ad. At that point, I'm just dropping my three mushrooms, blowing them up, and then calling it a day. Um, but the key things to keep in mind on Cho'Gall are keep boss dotted, of course. When the adherents come up, keep both of them dotted. And then as the adherents are dying, we're moving the adherents out and they're dying and dropping puddles. And then the oozes are going to spawn from these puddles. You can pre-place your mushrooms for it. And then once the oozes come out, blow up your mushrooms hurricane. They should die within like 3 seconds. You're going to get like maybe 2 seconds of a hurricane channel in. All the ads are going to be dead, and then you're back to business hitting the boss. It's not really padded damage. You have to kill them. They have to die. All the ranged help with bloods. So just blow them up quickly and go back to your business.
They nuked them.
As for last phase, uh, the only tips I can give you pretty much are damage to spike tentacles are excluded, which are the big ones that spawn on heroic that you don't kill, you just move away from. Um, Good that it's excluded because they're not supposed to die anyways. But as for the small eye stocks, tanks are going to generally position in a cubby to try and stack up as many of them in a tight group as possible. And in cases like that, you're going to want to, as they're spawning, you're going to want to drop your mushrooms down and blow them up, hit as many targets as possible. It's also important for your raid team that as many people as possible can kick that channel. That channel is very harmful, reduces damage and healing done. It's just painful on whoever it goes on. So use your solar beam on a big clump of them if you can, mushroom them, blow them up, and then back to business on Cho'Gall. I wouldn't really worry about dotting these unless there's one really out super far that you don't think is going to die right away. Then you can throw some dots on it to try and get some value there. But it's pretty much just going to be mushroom the stocks that are stacked up and then Cho'Gall damage.
All right, we're down to the last boss here. Another fight that I haven't even done this one on normal. Sinestra. I think
Sinestra isn't on normal.
Yeah, right. True. Yeah, so nobody's done it, so I'm not alone there. But as far as heroic Sinestra goes, it looks like healing done to Callan is excluded. I have no idea what that even means, but Sinestra. I've got your replay showing in the background here. So, what are you doing on Sinestra?
So on Sinestra, we all start on the right side, of course, and we are just starting off hitting the boss. Sinestra is an interesting fight because a lot of the damage that you're doing doesn't happen at the beginning. The beginning is just I'm going to call it a low damage period in the fight. You're just doing your normal rotation. You're ignoring everything. Uh, you're not supposed to hit the whelps. The whelps, we do not want them to be hit. A lot of people who are trying to pad on this fight are just going to pad on whelps. But you don't really want to be doing that. It's very harmful to the group to do that until it's the right time for them to die. So you're pretty much just doing your regular rotation on Sinestra. Once the boss gets low enough, she's going to start casting a spell that will wipe the group, and that's where Callan comes in. Callan is a friendly NPC that comes into the fight, since you were curious, and healers are supposed to keep him alive. He is going to generate a massive red shield for us to get into, which will prevent us from dying to that one-shot cast. Inside that shield is where we're going to be taking the whelps and actually killing them, only inside that shield, which is why it's important for them not to just be getting hit outside at the start. We just want to be pushing the boss so that we can get into the shield and then kill them. After that point, we're going back to hitting the boss a little bit. The healers are healing Callan, and 2 eggs are going to spawn on the left and right side of the room. So I'm assigned to the left egg. So what I will do is, as I'm running over to my left egg, I'll be mushrooming Sinestra just for some damage because I need to be running because my dots are already up, and getting in range of the egg. And we have to push Sinestra to the point where eggs become hittable. So we're just hitting Sinestra, eggs are going to become hittable. At that point, we are keeping dots on Sinestra and the egg, so we're in range of both, and focusing everything on the egg. Once the egg is dead, we can leave that area, and there are going to be 2 additional mobs in the back that the tanks, Death Knights, and Rogues are dealing with. Spike Collars and Drakes. Those, along with Sinestra, we're going to keep dots on everything. We're going to be trying to kill those ads. After everything is dead, after we phase, the eggs are dead, everything's dead, Callan is going to give us a damage buff. Now, this damage buff, very importantly, is extremely strong and makes it probably the most fun fight to do out of all of them. It is a buff that gives you 100% haste to everyone. So it means you're casting instantly, your dots are massive, everything, it's really fun. You get to cast really fast. You're pretty much zooming eclipse to eclipse. You're just going back and forth. Your casts are going off instantly. You're getting lots of Star Surge procs. And at that point, you're pretty much just nuking the boss, doing as much damage as you can to her as you can. And then after that point, the buff will fall off. The boss will be, around 15% health, 10% health. That's usually when groups lust and then finish the boss to supplement the haste that we're losing from the buff. We lust to give us, a little bit of the haste back. So it's just a fun fight. You just have lots of haste pretty much all the time, and you're just pushing through. There's not many tips I can give you. Like if you're trying to just parse and just, be a nuisance to your raid, I guess pad on whelps, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would just try and do damage. Keep your dots up, do your single target damage, and, kill the fight.
Sounds fun. You got me excited to start doing some heroic prog on this fight. It might be next week, but Yeah, that sounds too fun. I was watching your Wrath cast just go like 0.8 second casts. That looks sick. I missed the fast casting stuff. Like pre-patch of Cata felt really good to be going into what was ICC and just pumping out casts super fast, and then leveling up to 85. Like once I got to 83, 84, the cast time started to get longer again. I was like, oh no. But yeah, I love haste crit. I mean everything. Mastery, I need to get more on board with because you're making me feel bad for not using mushrooms as much as I have been, and trying to snapshot a solar a little bit and keep my dots going. But I've learned a thing or two tonight. So thanks for going through everything with me here. And is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to talk about really quick?
Um, I don't think so. I think the majority of it was covered. Um, a lot of the confusion with stats is basically around the haste breakpoints. There are spreadsheets you can find um, that tell you what your breakpoint is with DI, without DI. Like I said, I use the 1500 haste breakpoint because I have a DI and I'm counting Nature's Grace being up, which pretty much means my mastery is actually currently higher than my haste because once you hit that
Hmm.
1500, I am counting haste as having less value than the mastery. So I have 1500 haste and around I think 1800 mastery right now. So pretty much everything was covered. Just in terms of stats, like if there's any confusion, uh, try and find out what buffs you have up, if you have DI or not, and find the breakpoint that you can, you know, actually hit and use, so that your dots are gaining damage.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to the Reforge place next time I log on and figure that stuff out. I got a little bit of work to do, I guess. But yeah, dude, thanks again, Apathy, for joining me. Do you stream at all, or?
I stream occasionally. I generally only stream prog. Generally,
Oh,
um, oftentimes I'll stream Demon Hunter gameplay on my stream because I'm a retail Demon Hunter player. Usually, when retail comes out with a raid, will be my guild raids I think 6 days a week. So I stream the entirety of Prague on Demon Hunter, and same thing with Cata here. Cata, the race only lasts 1 day because, of course, everything is just going to be dead. But I streamed the entirety of our clear. I don't think I saved the VOD, but I can check to see if I have it still, and I could maybe upload it.
right on. I'll have to get the link for your Twitch, and I'll have it in the description of the video here at the end. So, anything else to say? I mean, I'm happy with where we're at.
No, I think I'm good.
All right, man. Thanks again for joining, and shout out to your guild. What was it called again? Something Go.
We go.
We Go. Yeah. Subtle said it the other day when I was having a chat with him, and I was like, "Oh yeah, what a great guild name with the word Go in it." All right, man. Have a great night.
Yep, have a great night. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. See ya.